through the space age, the Hotel Indialantic, the Tradewinds, was the place that signified the sophistication and the allure of Indialantic. And the reason it was here goes back to a young Dutchman who came to this country and made a fortune in the early automotive industry, which, as you probably know, they didn't know was going to be on the West Coast or Detroit. And he came from California with his young family to Melbourne for reasons of health in 1915, and looked across and saw the barrier island where we are now, which had really only been inhabited seasonally by Ais Indians, by a few people in Melbourne Beach, and was used to cultivate pineapples by growers from O'Galley and Melbourne until the freeze of 1895. And when they replanted, they discovered that Cuba was shipping pineapples to the... Can you all hear me? Yeah. And I should back up. I'm Jennifer Marks, the chairperson of the Indialantic Heritage Committee. And we have with us today Councilman Vic Dunn, Councilman Stu Glass, yes, and Indialantic's Town Manager Trish All. And they welcome you as I do. And so Ernest Cowenhoven, the name may be familiar to you because the Melbourne Causeway is named for him, and his family has been intimately associated with the development of Indialantic. And our panelists today who are going to lead the discussion, Cindy Earp will moderate, and Marsha Littlejohn and Ian Milligan, granddaughters, hard to believe, great-great-great-granddaughters maybe, of Ernest Cowenhoven, will share their memories. And Dan Abbott and Bob Doherty, whose families were intimately intertwined with the Tradewinds, will talk about their family's involvement. And then I know there are people in the audience who have things to share, and we encourage you to share them. And I will only say that, add a couple of lines from a 1925 brochure. I quote, "Here is a new and unusually beautiful hostelry, built after the style of early Spanish structures, with broad verandas and a wide patio. Every appointment has been pronounced delightful. Service and food will satisfy the most exacting. The climate in Indialantic is just ideal, surpassing southern Italy or the Riviera. Glorious is the sunrise, beautiful days, gorgeous is the sunset." Remember, this is the 20s, a lot of hyperbole, but still. All right. "Marvelous nights with huge fronds of waving palms to lull you to sleep." And I want to add, I'm expecting representatives of the Meehan family to come, because the Tradewinds is, although it's gone, it's still alive in so many ways, from windows from the Tradewinds incorporated into the Meehan store, architectural components from the Tradewinds incorporated into a house on 9th Terrace, and our front yard, a perennial mess, because there was a 9-hole golf course, and we got the horrible golf course grass that will not die. We've had the lawn replaced once, and it's been rototilled twice, and I've given up. But the Tradewinds lives on, and to bring it to vivid life, I'll leave it to our panel.
Thank you. I just want to begin by saying thank you all for coming, and that we are recording this, so, not that matters, but I just want you to be aware of that. The other thing is, if I could ask your indulgence in turning your cell phones off, so we can get a lot done here today. The first thing that I really would like to ask is, how many people live in the Tradewind Terraces that's here today? Okay. So you literally live in the footprint of what was once that Grand Hotel. And that's really exciting. I'm glad you're here today, so you'll know more about what spirits lie within your means there. And we're going to begin today with someone who has lot of history, not only of the Tradewinds, but of Indialantic itself. And so I'd like for Dan to begin with some of your stories and your history of the Tradewinds.
Thank you. My grandfather bought the Indialantic Hotel probably in around close to 1930. And immediately changed the name to the Tradewinds. He hated the name Indialantic. Absolutely hated it.
And if you can't hear in the back, just raise your hands, okay? So
And it was our grandfather that named it Indialantic.
Right. In fact, there was a sign after the bridge. There wasn't a clock there, it was a bridge. And it said, "Welcome to Indialantic." And he tore that sign down and put "Welcome to Bahama Beach." Because for years there would be maps that said Indialantic right above that was Bahama Beach.
And we tore the Bahama Beach signs down.
So, my Carl Abbott was a hotel man, and his father was a hotel man they were from New Hampshire and New York. And those were the days of resort hotels. So it wasn't like it is now where you spend a night or two or maybe a week. You spend the whole season. So the idea was that in the wintertime down here, you'd come down and spend the season down here. And a hotel was measured by this clientele. In the summertime, the hotel would close and they would go up north to one of the hotels. At one time, there were 42 hotels in the Abbott chain, up and down the eastern seaboard. So, but Carl Abbott spent a lot of time on the road, a lot of time moving, but he took his own crew with him. So the crew here was also the crew up north in the summertime. So he really did buy the Tradewinds of the Indialantic Hotel for two reasons. Number one, he knew the days of the resort hotel, the glory days of the resort hotel, were over after World War II. He knew that. And that the car had set people free and people were going to be on the road. And this whole seasonal kind of thing was going to change. So he bought the Tradewinds with the idea of it being kind of a retirement hotel. Because nobody in their right mind would see Carl Abbott retiring and going fishing all day long or playing shuffleboard. That just wasn't going to happen. It was too much of a ball of fire to do that. He also, last year I mentioned, he had a plan, once he got things established here, of developing into a family-based town, hometown, where families would build a family compound, and their social life would be centered around the Tradewinds Hotel and the Bahama Beach Club, which was where Dance Park is now. There was a beach club there, and it had rooms. You could get rooms at the DBC, but it was mainly for swimming and going to the beach and having a nice lunch. And that was the daytime activity was centered around the Bahama Beach Club, and in the evening, everybody would congregate around the Tradewinds. As far as I can remember back, we lived on 11th Avenue, and the front doors of the Tradewinds Hotel look right down at 11th Avenue. So we were the only house on the block. And I guess one of probably the most sweet memory that I had is that the Tradewinds really was kind of the center of the social group. If you wanted to do anything or meet anybody or see anything, you go to the Tradewinds. And being only 3 houses down and being 3.5 years old, of course we didn't have air conditioning back then. My room had a window on each side. So when I go to bed at night, on this side I could hear the ocean breaking. On this side I could hear the big band play from Tradewinds, and that lulled me to sleep, I thought. Afterwards, I thought there isn't a better way to go to sleep than that. So we spent a lot of time at the Tradewinds because they had a pool, and not everybody had a pool. In fact, very few people had pools. So to cool off, because there wasn't air conditioning, this would be the best thing to do is to drag the kids to the pool and throw them in and but drive each other crazy all night. Pool up at the BBC with salt water, and in the daytime, I mean, people would go to the Tradewinds, but mainly it was on the ocean, to Bahama Beach for them, because you could play in the ocean, you could play in the pool, and it was safe. Everybody knew everybody, and no one was going to drown unnoticed, because everybody knew your name.
It sounds like a magical place.
It was
I want to go back to that.
Wonderful.
How about you, Bob? Can you give us a little history of your time at the Tradewinds?
Well, my father bought the hotel from your grandfather, all that. He was 54, 55, he moved up from his mom.
Speak up a little bit.
Speak up. It was an interesting era, and it's hard for me to speak up any longer than that.
Okay.
Prior to that, like Mr. Abbott said, they were open for the season, a 3-month season, and my father realized that times were changing and that wouldn't work. So he turned it into a private club, and the family was in the area were able to join the club and then utilize the facilities all year round. And then by doing that, he was able to, in essence, make it. It was a wonderful era back then. We had the hotel through the beginning of the space program, all the original 7 astronauts stayed at the hotel. Word about Ron, personal friend of my father, and Marcia probably remembers, and everybody, some of that happened back then.
Excuse me, Bob, can you look at the audience and really throw your voice out? I can't pull this mic. We're going to try to.
Our mics aren't on. These are our cameras.
Eyes are
My
Are they on?
Yeah.
Hello?
Roy B. We're mic'd.
Well, can you hear me now?
Oh.
Well, I mean, like I said, it was a wonderful era. It's to get into all the details. I don't know what you want to hear. My father had to borrow money to buy the hotel. Actually, was close friends with Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy, Dan Taylor owned the Belmar Hotel in Palm Beach, East India Steamship Line. Edward Horton, the old silent movie actor. They lent my father money to buy the hotel.
Wow.
I can remember a letter Dan Taylor sent to his attorney, telling his attorney that we're going to lend Tom Doherty $50,000. If he pays us back, fine. If he doesn't pay us back, fine. And my father called him up and said, "What do you mean by this?" And he told my father, he said, "I can go to sleep tonight with no problem, knowing you won't be able to go to sleep till you pay me back." I talked to Jackson Bond, he's an attorney down, I think it was his 100 this year, but Jackson told me that he handled the closing of that when my father bought it. I wanted to tell my dad not to do it because they had to lose the money. And but that first year, because he made it into a private club and opened it all year round for the families in the area, and when he was able to make it, he made a success out of it. But it was a wonderful, wonderful era. It was a more social era back then. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody helped everybody. Things have changed.
Yeah. Dan, can you recall some historical figures or personalities that we might like to hear about being guests at the hotel?
I think Bob mentioned the astronauts were always around.
That's
And
great.
the original astronauts, the 7, verse 7. They were, Jim Rathman built them special Corvettes, and they were tricked out amazingly. And you could see, you'd be at the stop sign in Riverside Drive and 192, And Gus Grissom would come drifting around and blowing down one night in your Riverside Drive in his Corvette. You know, I mean, you could see they were all visible.
Yeah, Edward T. Robinson, they filmed a movie here. I remember the big leaguer, that was probably a little bit short. He stayed at the Hotel Myrna Lloyd.
What was the movie?
The Big Leaguer, I believe, what's the name of that? And of course, Charles Lindbergh, Edward R. Murrow.
Robinson.
Exactly. A number of people. And of course, a lot of the military people are involved with the John Harris, the Army Space Program, and whatnot, had a Redstone Arsenal on it. All these people stayed there.
John lived here. His son lived here.
And we're gonna throw in the mix the grandmoms of Indialantic. They say they don't remember everything, but I tell Deanne all the time that she's forgotten more than I remember, so.
And they're seated next to each other because if one of them says something, the other doesn't remember the same way they're going to be.
And I can jump in the middle just in case.
Okay, my sister's older than I am, so she was smart. She was the smart one. And she was, one of the things I would like to say is I have learned so much.
Could you lean up, please?
Or use the
And talk into the mic.
into the microphone.
Yes, please. Or Mark is a professional broadcaster.
Oh, you're
so-
Are you on?
I just want to say the one thing I have learned so much just from Danny and from Bob today. Oh, I'm sorry, Danny. Yes, and I'm going to say it right now because he hates it. If his grandfather, Uncle Carl, that I used to know, didn't like the name Indialantic, and that was simply because there are islands in between the Indian River and the Atlantic Ocean. That's where Indialantic comes from. And I have to tell you, yes, see, I have to tell you, I did babysit Danny Allen. It's for me to say that, but I did. And his mom, Aunt Laura, she had an etiquette class here for all of us. That's very, Jacobus remembers that. We all learned how to sit down, we learned how to say yes ma'am, we learned how to brush our teeth, we learned how to say please and thank you. That is where it all came from.
And then we forgot it just as quickly.
No, we did not. She was alive. But no, those are the wonderful things. But I am learning so much about that because first of all, I didn't know that Uncle Tom Drury owned the Tradewinds Hotel. I thought he was the great manager that came in from the Everglades Club. And you see how history is kind of crazy and changed around. So you learn so much from different people. I know Suzanne Kerr wanted to be here so badly because I don't know how many of you know Suzanne Kerr and her family. And I'm so thrilled that you're recording this because Suzanne and her wonderful son Bill, they all wanted to be here and they couldn't throw me back in Tallahassee right now. But they want to hear every single thing that's said. And I can tell you Suzanne does not forget anything. But Uncle Carl Abbott was a great friend, and Esther was a great friend. That's, of course, they were great friends of my mom's and dad's. And I guess really, when you think about some of the things, when you think about Deanne and me, is it me or I? Me. She corrects my English all the time. But the interesting thing is that we are like another generation. I'm 75. Deanne's 90. So we come from another, we saw the cotillions, the most magnificent things that happened at the Tradewinds Hotel. And when I think about the astronauts, and I had the privilege of interviewing John Glenn when he was done with one of his books down at the Beer Beach Book Center, and just to remember some of those things that happened, and remember sitting out there at the Bahama Beach Club, I'm under the impression that it was the Bahama Beach Club where all the astronauts were all the time, because we would see them around. We would see them, but all those wonderful, fabulous things that happened at the Tradewinds Hotel. My sister and her husband Keith announced their marriage there. We had a great reception there. I think he brought pictures of that. That must have been 150 years
His
ago.
face is actually out.
But no, there were so many wonderful things that went on here, and as I say, every time I read, I was just just reading some things really last night on some of the sites that you all have. They're just fabulous. One of the things, Ann Hayward, we went to school. Ann Hayward. She's Ann Hayward. She will always be Ann Hayward to me. Mary Jacobus will always be Mary Jacobus to me. We're going back in time. We all went to school together. We all went to the bus stop right here. When the bus picked us up, we knew everybody. And it was the most wonderful, wonderful town in Indialantic. And how many of you have been here for at least 25 years?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
How many of you have been here for 50 years?
How about water fountains? Above water?
How many of you were born here? Oh.
Marcia was born here. We made the Mellion Hospital on US 1.
Absolutely.
No doctor, no anesthesia.
Oh, Dr. Hay. Everybody knows Dr. Hay. That was my doctor. First you, Mary. Were you born here?
No.
When I was 8 years old. 8 years old. So we didn't go to first grade, we went to third grade. And she's very bright. But I have to say, it is so wonderful to be here because every time when we come and do this, listening to Daddy, and now of course meeting Bob, it's just been wonderful to understand that there are so many things that go on in our lives today that are reflective of what happened before, the continuance, the magnificent events that happened over the Tradewinds Hotel. When they tore the Tradewinds Hotel down, it just broke my heart. And the Bahama Beach Club, when they tore that down. But Deanne knows much more than I do about the Tradewinds. You brought them up with me that way.
I'm trying to understand you.
Oh,
Okay.
After all these years.
No.
Okay.
I read everything that I could find because truthfully, I can only tell you memories of what went on for me. But my mom, I found some of my mother's things that she had written. And I'm going to read you what she wrote about the Tradewinds Hotel. And then I'm going to go back a little bit and tell you what I've learned. Not that I knew, but what I've learned trying to know something to talk about here. Count Hogan designed and planned and fought to develop Indialantic into a beautiful resort. In many ways, the town reflects his planning and imagination. He sold his interest in Indialantic to Herbert Earl, who represented a group of Detroit businessmen. The group developed the Indialantic Hotel, designed by a noted architect. I noticed she didn't put his name in. Where am I? Yeah. The slate floors were brought from Vermont, and the broad verandas were dotted with wicker chairs. The lobby was furnished in an airy wicker and cretonne style. Jennifer, what does that mean?
It means it's like chintz, but it's more open weave, you know, and it's florals. And the wicker chair that's over here, that is actually, Denise House has lent that to us. She was fortunate in saving 4 chairs and a table from the Tradewinds. So.
Lance, you're not sitting in it, are you?
I am not.
That's my baby.
With a dash of resort Spanish and a touch of Moorish fantasy. The Indialantic Casino, shopping center with fashionable bathing attire, and I noticed my mother's crossed that bit out, to rent, and I know about the Bahama Beach Club, that we called it. It had a seawater pool, baby pool. It was seawater, which was lovely for your skin. It dried it out. Manly Chestnut was the star resort home salesman. It was boom time and prices were high. In 1960, however, one woman told Mother with a sigh that her home was finally valued at the price she had paid for it. Indialantic ran out of time. The hurricane of 1926 ended the boom and halted further development for many years. That's my mother, Phyllis Hoskins. Phyllis Calhoun Hoskins, that's her right.
Oh, I have to say.
Don't cry, Marcia.
When she talks about when she paid for it, Daddy paid for it. There was she didn't like that.
But what I do remember about the Tradewinds, which is how we grew up, college, she's going to tell you everything I know. But what I do remember is that we had our cotillion there. It was a wonderful dance. It was just so exciting because of the lights, and this is a little tiny town. And for what it's worth, I grew up in the house right next door to this building. That was my dad built that house for my mom and me and Marcia. And I grew up in that house, which is a little tiny house, and that hotel was overwhelming. And what really was so fascinating for us during our generation was during the winter months, incredible friends came down from Michigan, from New York, from all around, very wealthy, lots of fun people came down, and we got to know so many people down here. Mrs. John Fraser, Dak Fraser, that some of you may know, that's how we knew, because her parents brought her down. And she was my mother's age, and so we all, and mother grew up with Aunt Dak. But there were lots of winter visitors here. So it was an elegant winter visitor time. And then when they left, we thought, oh, good, we could drive again. We were 12. So once they got on the roads, we were okay. But it was a totally different world then. The Bahama Beach Club was a private club for a long time. I couldn't find anything that said when it changed, but during my lifetime, the Bahama Beach Club turned into a private club, and people joined as members there. But the Tradewinds had tennis courts, a swimming pool. When I got married, I had our wedding reception at around the Tradewinds pools. It was just lovely. But the whole ambiance during the winter was so different than it is today, because it was cocktail parties every night. You remember that? I mean, it was nothing but lots and lots of, the men played poker on Thursday nights.
Tell the story of the beach road, you called it. Didn't you tell me that story? 11th Avenue, you guys called it the beach road because the people would go to the beach and come back and they would lose their rings and money, and you kids would go down there when it was sandy and find all
the things that were gone.
Yeah, they were so bad when they paved the road.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of things we didn't like that they did. But we loved the bridge. I'm digressing now, but the bridge when we grew up had no railings the first time, and then as we were a little older, they had railings, and there was 2 lanes, and there was a man in the middle who lived in a little house on the bridge. All of you remember that? And he would come out, the boats would honk 3 honks, and he would come out, put this thing and turn it around on the bridge. We would all jump out of our cars and run over, jump over the little span, and ride around with him, and then get back in the cars. It was wonderful, and it was a safe, wonderful world. Even during World War II, when we would walk out to the ocean, I make it sound like it happened a lot. It didn't. We watched submarines burn off the coast, or tankers, great huge oil tankers that were going to Cuba would burn. Am I wrong, Bob?
No.
Tell me if I am.
One actually set it on fire at one time.
What was set on fire?
7 tankers off of Melbourne Beach.
Bob Marks, who knows more than God, said that there were 7 tankers burning off the coast at one time. And it seemed to me like it was forever, but probably one time munitions came up on the shore.
It was the
Unlike
German tankers that were shooting at them.
Unlike later, when it was bales of marijuana floating up on our gone through a lot. But the Tradewinds had a water tower behind it. Do you remember that? The big water tower, and we got in more trouble climbing up that water tower for no earthly reason. Not to drink, not to anything, but to do it.
Because it was
She never climbed up that water tower.
Oh, yes, I did.
We're honored today to have Dr. Katniss and his wife Sarah in our crowd, and at one time FIT owned the Tradewinds, correct? And used it for just college students to stay in. And there was a time, my husband even remembers, when they would let you buy a summer lease and go into the pool. Jim's mother in '69 did that for her kids, so they could go up to swim in the pool. So I think there were many ways they tried to get creative toward the end to try and save it. You know what I think I'd like to do, if all of you are okay with it, is see if there's some questions out there in the crowd of you four, because you have so much information and history that they might be able to ask of you. So if you'll just raise your hand and I'll notice you. Yes.
What was the fee for staying there, and how many rooms was in the hotel?
I defer to you.
Yeah, you guys?
I think there were 72 rooms altogether, 12 cottages to the side. And as far as what they charge, I cannot.
There's on the table
That
there,
little book has all the
or in
numbers.
the case.
22 to 26 in increments of 2, because I read the book, I glanced very quickly. And then when the cottages were built, they were charging 12, 14, and 16 per. So that's getting some like that.
Are there any more questions out there? Surely there are.
No, I,
Yes.
How many high society functions and with, as you talk about your cotillions, were there any coming out parties, or is that what the cotillion is? When ladies in society are presented to
we
their.
didn't have that, Melvin.
No, but we did, the cotillion that we keep talking to was this wonderful, I think it was Mikey Brower and Carol Gleason and my mom. There was a cotillion committee, and yes, and Mary Jacobus's mommy. And they all got together to get all, and they were, because Aunt Laura Abbott had taught us how to genuflect and how to curtsy and to do, and to wear the right and proper clothes, and to say yes sir and no ma'am. And so we had to go use that, and we did. It was the most exciting thing in the world to be included. It was like the junior league of South Brevard, but nobody had ever even heard of the junior league back then. It was just really, it was the cotillion, which was really, I think, really around Christmas time, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and also, Marcia, I know Marcia Dennius, Marcia Fletcher Dennius remembered, she emailed me, she remembered when the high school dances were held there, and big band music and.
Len Turner, do you remember
Len Turner, yes.
Len Turner, his band was there, right? I mean, and he's still playing.
And dancing on the slate floors, and I've had, as chair of the Heritage Committee, so many people, at least 20 people over the years, have phoned from Michigan or Massachusetts or Colorado to say, I remember the Tradewinds. I took swimming lessons there. Can you hear me? Yeah. There was a woman who played jazz piano in the bar in the 50s and in the early 60s, and her daughter would come and do her homework and then go down and play in the basement. And there was a vat, believe it or not, a block from the beach.
Huge basement.
There was a huge basement, and she said there were all kinds of treasures and things down there. And some of the guests in the early era were people who made fortunes in the automotive industry, the Fishers, who body by Fisher, you know, General Motors, and some of the big agricultural machine families. It was definitely on the radar as a place to go. And Herbert Earl had the idea that Indialantic would develop like Palm Beach was developing. But the people who were already here, few as they were vocal in saying that they wanted this to be a family residential community, which is what the folks who live here still want it to be. And Chris, what is your memory of the Tradewinds?
Well, FIT owned the Tradewinds when I was attending FIT. One of the original nationals. I never lived there, but we did have students there. And as a freshman, I got my chauffeur's license and helped drive the FIT bus back and forth, shuttle the students back to the campus, back over here.
And how in general did the students regard it as a place to be?
I wasn't into that. That's why I did it. I drove the bus and that's all I did.
But you also had to graduate in Mountain Beach.
Now, as a student, but you still live there.
Dr. Denny?
The legend is that Florida Tech was created at Tradewinds Hotel in the bar. Dr. Jerome Cooper was the chief scientist at RCA, that was now Kennedy Space Center, and he was with a group of his buddies, and they were complaining that they had all these undergraduate engineers with no graduate opportunities. And they were talking about the need for a university here, especially a graduate school. And there was a guy at the end of the bar who was getting annoyed at all this talk. And he had just bought a beer, and he had 17 cents change. He took the 17 cents, he put it in front of Cooper, he said, "Go start your university, here's your endowment."
If I'm not mistaken, the Coopers live right across the street from the Tradewinds Hotel.
Yeah.
Right.
And interestingly enough, when it got started, it was meeting in different places, including a school. It was called the Night School. Time Magazine wrote an article, Night School for Engineers. And Misselman, that was it. And then when it was discovered that there was an African American who was attending the classes, the school board yanked the permission to meet there. And Dr. Cooper, that spurred him on to, it's a long and fascinating story, develop where the campus is today. Jill
No, I was
Hoffman.
just going to say my dad, Charles, was one of the scientists that was with him and worked with him. Actually, Dr. Cooper worked in my dad's group. My dad was his boss at the time. And he worked with him all the way through until they were able to release it.
And Jill and Charlton grew up right here in Indiana.
Came here in the 50s.
Wow.
And you know, our father taught one of the first things, because there were students at another place, and they would have a TV camera on Daddy, and Daddy would talk. And if they had a question, they would call him on the telephone, and my dad would answer the telephone and answer the question. So it was like the very first time things like that were done.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Some people, and I'm curious, FIT, here, all the students, when the building was just done.
Right, okay, well, the building, it became apparent that the hotel as a hotel was no longer sustainable. And there were floated various solutions about what to do with this beautiful campus. Originally, the property was 40 acres. And it was down to 9 acres when it was offered to Indialantic as a town hall site. And that didn't work out. It was offered to, who else? Several developers. Eventually,
Charles Gibbs tried to buy it.
Charlie?
Yeah. Mrs. Gibbs wouldn't give him the money.
right. And Joel Ruth is not here, but his father at one time owned it with a woman who, and then he died, and then and then it was torn down.
Why hasn't anybody mentioned Roy Ecclestone? When did
He was in the first crowd.
Right, he was in the first crowd, yeah.
But he owned the Tradewinds Hotel.
Right. He
With
started
7 others.
And
Yeah.
I thought he was the one who, of course, he knew Tommy
the Hotel India.
from the Everglades.
But he was there before.
Yeah.
He was, and he, for your information, Marcia, he wanted to put coin meters on the beach. And the town of Indialantic said, no, we are not having coin meters on our beach, which we now have.
Well, the town of Indialantic, the town of Indialantic was incorporated in 1952, but we talk about the town of Indialantic as being before that. Yes.
So I have a question. When were the Australian pines planted along the way?
Along the causeway. Oh, Waycrest.
Before the freeze.
Way. Oh, they were there, because we used to have it along the causeway, so now it's the Kiwanis Club.
I mean, they showed up in Florida in the 50s as a way to break the wind, and also.
But somebody must have planted those because they were pretty evenly spaced.
Yeah.
But that was a state road too, so.
They go back to the
Waycrest was
1920s.
mine.
Yeah.
Frank Thomas, Frank?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that they go back to the 1920s. The Australian pines on when they and on Waycrest.
Frank Thomas, historian.
Yeah.
So I've got another question Frank might answer. The Melbourne Beach had the club down there, the casino, Melbourne Beach Casino. Now, how did that figure into the social life of Indialantic?
Oh, my gosh, are you kidding?
No, I mean, it wasn't associated.
No, it wasn't associated, it wasn't connected, but it sure bucket of blood, but maybe.
Vero Beach.
Oh, that's Vero Beach. That's the,
Yeah.
that's the old patio. That's the patio. No, but it was the, Vero Beach Casino. It was two swimming pools, but it was all, when we had World War II here, I mean, not here, but when World War II was in its, infancy, really, we had a lot of people, because the military was there at the casino, weren't they? Didn't they enjoy that as well, down in Norman Beach?
So was that a competitor to the Bahama Beach Club?
Bahama Beach Club was a private
Blue
club.
flag, blue
And
collar.
you can probably
Yeah,
address
blue
that.
collar, that's the Bahama Beach Club. Oh, you mean
No,
the
casino.
But the city was open to the public.
Because, and people would come over by boat down to John, well, that's Bahama Beach. They bring them over by boat and they go down that little
Can you talk about this?
down to the end down here. Yes, all the others. And I bet, I think, because I know my mom and Barbie Bancroft used to walk along the beach and watch for the submarines. They were with the Army Air Force. She told me she learned how to change tires, but she did not.
Are there any of those stands left on the beach side?
There was, I don't know if there still is.
Well,
The lookout.
Sebastian Beach Inn had
Used to
one.
be one of the places where
But
they
it's
had
gone.
a lookout tower there, because they had like a Coast Guard station. That used to be a sort of.
It was a lookout. It was one of the,
A submarine.
Frank,
There
you
was
know what
one
that
where
was.
there used to be the observatory down for Spencer Colony. There was a tower there too. An interesting story was that, the idea that the Nazis were going to be here was a real threat. I mean, it was perceived as, yes, they were blowing up tankers right off the coast. My dad said he would come home from leave when he was in the Army and see the red glow off you couldn't see them because they weren't that close, but they were close enough so at night you could see the glow of the burning ships. And Carl Abbott had the maintenance crew put planks in the beach down where 11th Avenue is. And then he would get in the tower, either the tower of the hotel or the water tower. He went up in the water tower with a rifle and target practice to shoot Nazis coming.
Actually, we had blackout shades where we were told, we would have the siren go off and we had to pull down the blackout shades because what it was is there was a Army base up in Jacksonville and it was those guys coming down here. We had the German submarines off the coast there that were shooting and they could see the submarines coming down. So those blackout shades, I thought it was the greatest thing. It was more fun. You just got to go stay on your mom's bed and just pull those blackout shades down.
You weren't supposed to salvage stuff and wash up on the beach there.
But we did.
And Tradewinds had, there was a 9-hole golf course behind Tradewinds. And to maintenance, there was a Model A Ford that Carl Abbott had. It was turned into a pickup truck. It was called Pluto. And some many 55-gallon drums of avgas, super high octane gas washed up. And they took it to Tradewinds, behind Tradewinds in the maintenance shed there. And Pluto ran on avgas. So the joke was that you could always tell it was Pluto because there was 4-foot flames on that.
Tell me about the basement of the hotel. Either of you remember this?
My gosh, this kid was building all this on wonderful.
Hold that closer to you.
The whole motel had a basement below it, and they had certain areas that were open, that left open, so in case it flooded, it wouldn't knock the building up. But it was, spent a lot of time in it.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine basements on the beach side, but there are many of the older homes. Yours has a basement. The Gibbs home had a basement. There were a lot of homes here on the beach side that had basements in them. Yes, ma'am?
My dad was, in charge of civil defense at one point, and the Tradewinds basement was the only shelter on the beach.
Oh, so.
You know,
Atomic weapons.
yeah, and I just, there is Sergeant Baker here. He told me that there's a little, across from Tradewinds Terrace, there's a lovely little old 20s house. And he said that was cobbled together from several of the bungalows which were on the premises because people used to come and stay for the season in the bungalows. And going down Shannon Avenue, just south of Orlando, a block or so on the left, is that apartment house, that old 20s apartment house. And that was where people who were associated with the hostel stayed. And that has a basement too. And both our house and that basement flooded.
It's called the Palms.
Amy.
Did I hear that apartment house on Shannon, where I heard that workers lived there,
Yeah.
employees, housed Al Capone's guns or something? I mean, I hear things about Al Capone. I've only lived here 4 years, and I just think
There's a rumor about that, and then also on Ocean Terrace, there's an old house that's been redone and is a little difficult to recognize, where supposedly during Prohibition, there was a lot of stuff that was, it was used as a depot, and we don't know.
for Al Capone.
Supposedly.
That apartment was called the Palms Apartments. Anyway, it was here years and years and years. My grandmother used to live there, and she was not a worker. Her grandmother, attorney.
So it was just an apartment building, you mean?
That was Mrs. Calhoun.
It was just a
It was an
residence?
apartment, and they had, but people lived there, before they were building their homes, and they would live there, but it was beautiful. It was right on Shannon Avenue, that's the one you're talking about. Yeah.
Shannon and Tampa.
Shannon and Tampa, right, absolutely.
That water tower that you were talking about, is that the one that was here?
It was here, it was behind it, and we used to climb up it.
Same one?
There were two.
There still is.
There was one for the hotel, that was the original one, and then they built the one for the city.
Okay, so that's,
The big one.
Ann Taylor used to climb up that water tower.
I saw a hand up in the back. Yes.
My family moved here in 1966, and I don't know how much of this I have made up in my mind, but I remember that there was a restaurant that was still operating during those years in the Tradewinds. Do you remember that?
There was a bar, wasn't there?
In 1966.
6 rounds in, the bar was.
What was the name of that bar? Do you know?
6 rounds in.
The what?
If that's what you're talking about, the 6 rounds in.
The 6 Crowns Inn. And I remember that there was an entertainer that played there frequently, and she was somewhat of a Sophie Tucker-like performer, Red Hot Mama. Does anybody remember her? And what her name was?
Oh, Joyce Satterfield.
Who?
Joyce Satterfield?
Joyce Satterfield?
Ruthie Green, we were stationed at Patrick Air Force Base, and we used to come down on Friday nights and listen to Ruthie Green.
Rosie
Yeah,
Green?
Ruthie Green. And she was imitated like Sophie Tucker, kind of piano playing. She was Red Hot Mama.
Yes.
Red Hot Mama. You say that's the name you recall too?
I remember for quite a number of years that she played there.
Wonderful. And there was another hand up in the back?
I want to tell my favorite story about that bar.
Okay.
Bob Horn, who was a very interesting mayor of Indialantic, fine fellow, decided to have a beautification ball. This would have been about 1968 or 69, and the bar was open, the beautification ball. And Arnie Moyer, my wife, we were there, and the interesting point was that Arnie said, "Sure, I woke up next morning and I had this pocket full of dimes." And we tried to figure out, and the drinks were 90 cents.
All we have to do is count them
I saw another hand in the back. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious as to how many people were employed there during the crime. Does anyone have any idea?
Ann, would you like to start? No? How about you?
No, I can't remember either, but I know that during the chef. I had like his crew would come down and handle all the food for that season. And then there was a black woman, Rita Wayman.
I remember Rita. Yeah.
And what she was the pastry chef, but she would handle the kitchen during the off season when I was a crew. And what a wonderful pastry chef.
Rita, she started working with Carl Abbott many, many years before that, and she would go north and south with him for the resort hotels. And her husband, Jim, Big Jim, was the head of the maintenance department. And I can remember him being up on the roof on a miserably hot day, and Mother walked up and said, "Jim, are you doing okay up there?" And he said, "It's not hard if you don't dread it." Rita, there was a thing called an Abbott Design hotel. Kitchen, Abbott Design kitchen. And what it was kind of like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, because in the center of the kitchen there was a raised platform with a desk, and that's where the head chef, the kitchen head, would be, and they would direct what was going on. Of course, they would be coming down and doing national cooking and stuff like that. But there's many hotels built in that era that have what they call an Abbott Design kitchen.
Interesting. Danny, what you haven't said is that Uncle Carl, your granddaddy had one of them needed. When I was going to camp up in New Hampshire, we stopped and went to their hotel on Montauk, Long Island.
The Montauk Bar.
Yeah, and it was, you talk about, and that is where Uncle Carl learned about, they knew of this fantastic, what do you call it, hotellery, and that was Carl Abbott, and that's what brought him here. And somebody found him to bring him down here.
It wasn't, the Montauk Club was
No, but they knew of him as the guy that knew anything. If you want to get a big hotel, his name was world renowned.
He put together the Flamingo down in Miami. He put together the Vinoy over in St. Petersburg, and the Bellevue Biltmore in Clearwater. Those were all
First world renowned.
Vinoy Park is still there. It's a beautiful hotel. The Bellevue Biltmore, I understand, they're going to tear down, but it's still standing.
But was it? I still am confused about where Lloyd Ecclestone came in the picture.
At the beginning.
With the hotel. No, because he lived right across the street too from the Tradewinds. He owned the Tradewinds Hotel. I thought he bought it. He didn't own the Tradewinds Hotel. He bought it from Rudy Outsaw, all that property.
My understanding, maybe I may be wrong, but he was one of the bad person.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Just like John Island, Wall Street.
Of Indialantic. He brought I think from if I'm not mistaken. Herbert R. Earl. No, Herbert R. Earl bought it from our grandfather. Then Rudy Outsaw bought it huge, and it's right here. You see Outsaw, let's say right here. Well, he bought a whole lot of property and lots.
They can't hear you.
He brought a lot of property, and I thought that Lloyd Ecclestone came down and got all of that and really developed a huge part of Indialantic. And the Tradewinds Hotel was part of it.
But I remember saying, like that, talking about him as having built the hotel.
Yeah, I thought that was, okay.
Did Carl Abbott live in the hotel?
No.
No, he lived
right on the river.
on Riverside Drive.
Okay.
As far north as you could go.
Next to the Haywards Bar.
Next to the Havens.
And the owner of the house is sitting next to me, where
The owner of the house now.
Yeah.
In that
Sure.
Ken. Oh, cool. Ken.
Well, Rudy Outsaw built many of the houses north of 192. My dad worked with him because my dad went to Miami and worked with the Red Wheeler construction company when he first got out of the Army. There was a plan. This really isn't about Tradewinds, but it's about hotels. There was a plan that they put together. Red Wheeler, who built all the big hotels in Miami Beach, they realized that the resort era was gone after the war, and that the automobile was king. So they got together and were going to build places where you could stay one night. we call them motels nowadays. It was going to be called the Jolly Coachman Inn. And so the idea was that there would be, in hotels in those days, you would have a seating for dinner, and you would sit at the same table every night, and it would be either be the 5:30 seat or the 7 o'clock seat. Well, with people on the road after the war, going here, there, and everywhere, that wasn't going to work. So they decided to make the restaurant separate, and anybody could come in at any time, just like a restaurant. So they got this restaurant owner in New York to put that part of it together. They were going to call them the Jolly Coachman Inns. And they started buying property, and they bought property up and down the eastern seaboard. And in 1950, Carl Abbott was in Jacksonville starting what he hoped to start here in Indialantic, which was like Hope Sound. He was up there, he got pneumonia, and was in the hospital and died. So they went on with this idea, and eventually it broke up. People couldn't agree on things. But the restaurant owner, whose name was Howard Johnson, built the rest of his empire off of what was called the Jolly Coachman Inn.
So that's what I mean, is the whole history of hotels, and to think that Carl Abbott, who was part of our lives growing up, and of course you also had a fabulous uncle called Carl Abbott that was a good friend of Deanne's and of course all the Gleasons. We just all had such great times. And when you think about Carl, when I think about Carl Abbott and Aunt Esther, it just is all part of what Indialantic was all about, and the Tradewinds Hotel was such a magnificent part of it. My recollection is then that Lloyd Ecclestone came in, and knowing Rudy Outsaw, who owned a lot of property because he was a realtor, and then Lloyd bought all of that, and it was my understanding that Lloyd Ecclestone bought the hotel from Carl Abbott.
No, it's not, right. I'm going to give you a little thing,
And then bought the town, and then bought.
My dad bought it from Carl Abbott for waste steel.
Okay, here's what I'm going to tell you. That my mother.
Okay, Deanne, you have
this. Town Hoban designed and planned to develop Indialantic into a beautiful resort. In many ways, the town reflects his planning and imagination. He sold his interest in Indialantic to Herbert Earl, who represented a group, I said this earlier, of Detroit businessmen. The group developed the Indialantic Hotel. I read this to you earlier. You just had forgotten. Shouldn't forget what I read.
What year did Calvin Hoban come into the area? What year? 1915, so around World War I.
Ernest Count Hoban, here's for your information. I'm not going to let you look at it. Ernest Count Hoban came to America at the age of 19. His youth was spent in England, Holland, and France. His father was a grain merchant. It tells a lot of stuff about bicycles and stuff. He saw a great possibility. He acquired property in Florida, and in 1914, he came down to investigate his acquisition, which is a piece of property. He saw great possibilities in the beach land as a resort. He purchased Hector's property on what was called East Melbourne.
Yeah,
That's us.
Hector from Melbourne, because it was called East Melbourne.
Right. At that time, the pineapple patches were beginning to suffer. Wells had a pineapple patch. Overno Valley residents owned pineapple plantation. Don Bogine had returned.
Melbourne Beach.
Had returned and ran his boat back and forth. Anyhow, it was then when he came and he looked at it. Then he did a mile by mile plat of Indialantic. Is that right?
Well, it's 1 square mile, so.
Well, yeah, 1 square mile. But and that was Indialantic, and he owned that. But then he lost all his money, and so he sold it to Hector Earl, who got a group, 6 or 7 Michigan investors, of whom Lloyd Ecclestone was one. And they came down, and that's how the hotel started. Don't disagree with me, please.
I'm trying not to be contrary, but I'm reading this.
I wrote that.
Okay. Then, Marsha, tell your sister that in here where she wrote, it says Herbert Girl.
Well, her.
How do you get Hector out of Herbert?
She missed.
I'm very dyslexic. Okay. I understand it, and I got made. Every time she says Hector, it is Herbert R. Earl. That has a big name you're gonna see after Ernest Calhoun, Herbert R. Earl. It does Carl Abbott, Tom Doherty. But thank you very much.
No, only because I'm trying to think of names and keep a contrast.
Because there wasn't.
It throws off a shoe, you know.
Yes.
I stand corrected.
Denise?
What is the distinction between the two different spellings of Tradewinds? One where it's two words and the other one word. Is that just accident through the years or?
I don't know.
That was way. I think it might have been when Tom Doherty was managing it that he merged the words.
Any idea?
Yeah, there was always.
So it's one word.
Oh, that would be great. Before we come to the conclusion of today, I'll get your question in just a second. I just wanted Jennifer or, well, no, not you. One of the Heritage Committees to tell you what is around the room on the display so that you'll know what you're looking at. Because I want you to take time when you get refreshments to be able to look at some of the artifacts that were brought here today and you'll be able to share them. So, Carol?
Well, around the room, you'll see various pieces of memorabilia, brochures, PR material, watercolors of Indialantic that don't necessarily have to do with the Tradewinds, refreshments, which we hope you'll partake of, and in fact, nobody's leaving until they're all gone, and the collection of bathing suits. Cindy Earp has a rather amazing collection of vintage clothing and accessories spanning 150 years. And available, the Indialantic Heritage Committee has produced 3 things, all of them available. We hope you will take copies of the 2 brochures, one of which is a walking tour of historic homes from the 1920s. Interestingly enough, there were virtually no homes built here in the 1930s. And in the 40s, it wasn't until during World War II, and we owe World War II a debt of gratitude for making Indialantic known to many men who came and were stationed at the Banana River Naval Air Station and the Melbourne Naval Station. And after the war, things like air conditioning had been developed, DDT
Thank you, Lord.
for mosquitoes had been developed. The GI Bill made it possible for returning veterans to finance education in homes. The development of the space industry, the space race, brought people here, and that's how in the 40s you see and really burgeoning in the 50s. In fact, it wasn't until the late 50s, early 60s that values on land and homes reached what it had been prior to the crash. So we have the 2 brochures. One is the slender brochure. They're at the end of the counter here, and we have more of those run out. And then we have this, which is a facsimile of the very first brochure for a development. And this was the man we have been speaking of. We did this for the 60th anniversary of the incorporation of Indialantic. And this was, Rudy Outsoff, the realtor, and Prime Green Builders. And on the inside, we have a succinct history, a timeline of the history of Indialantic. And we also have little cards. We have a website, thanks to Stu Glass, town councilman. It's a pretty interesting website. A lot of the documents and photographs you see here are on the website. You can peruse them in the comfort of your own home. silver Addy, what's it called? The award is for non-broadcast video. And it's interviews with a lot of Indialantic pioneers and characters, some of whom are no longer with us. So these are for sale for $3, minimal cost, at the counter when town hall is open.
Denise, would you stand up also and show us one of our beautiful?
Yeah. And you also have to come up here and turn around.
Turn
We
around.
also have available t-shirts.
Thanks to Denise.
And Denise designed our logo here for the Heritage Committee.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'd like to take the final section of this. Linda, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to tell you all, someone asked more questions about Florida Tech, and we kind of moved over about the days they owned it. But through the Catneys, I contacted Dr. Gordon Patterson at Florida Tech. He's their historical person in charge of the archives. And he so graciously emailed to me articles that were in the newspaper back in the days when Florida Tech owned the Tradewinds Hotel. And also went farther and went into the history of the Tradewinds a little bit with some articles that Winona Cleveland had written. And those articles have been put on our website. So if you're interested in the days when Florida Tech owned the Tradewinds Hotel, you might want to go to our website and read those.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am?
I just have two quick questions. One, you mentioned that cotillion. I was trying to remember that because when I first moved here, I remember there was something, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it seemed like there were just certain people, you mentioned Ginger Lee, so just the select few from the various high schools got invited. Is that correct? And it was like a big privilege thing?
It was a privilege thing, because I remember I was not in the very beginning, and she was. So that was good. Was really exciting. But so I think age had a little bit to do with it. She was much older. Very selective. It was selective. Well, there was only one high school. One high school.
Well,
There was a Valley High School, but it all blended.
I was at South Line High, and they were invited.
Well, that was much later.
Well, it's still going on.
Hey, Linda, you have an interesting.
I watched you couple dances one night.
Linda, you have an interesting story about the art show that used to be in Indialantic. Your brother won the art show one year? Who was it?
That was Dick's brother.
Dick's
won
brother,
the
right.
first art show
Right.
in the Atlantic, and his prize was a 5-week trip to Europe.
Only in Indialantic.
Was that Bob Horn that started that though? Did Bob Horn have the mayor?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Was that Frank? When Bob Horn was mayor, he started that.
Yeah, he started that.
Which eventually became a Melbourne art show.
Right. Any other question?
Well, I wanted to tell you a little story.
Great, okay.
And only be told 50 years after it happened. I came here in 1960 as the assistant city manager of Melbourne. And at that time, one of the first tasks that we had was the water system that had just opened up and started business wasn't making money, and Chase Bank was appointing a receiver to take it over and to get it profitable so they could pay the bondholders back. And they were, to do that, they were empowered to issue real estate tax bonds on the population of Melbourne, but not the rest of the area. So Chase called us to New York to meet with the receiver, and we talked him into giving us 6 months to get profitable. So we came home and we hired a fellow by the name of Bernie Tasker, who was a car salesman, but he had a chemistry license. So we made Bernie a briefcase with test tubes and so forth, and he visited every house in Indialantic and the beaches, because this ran from Patrick to Sebastian. So Bernie met with them and showed them that if they continue to use their wells along with their septic tanks, eventually your water is going to look like this. Kind of yellow. So we needed to bring in 2,000 more users, and his efforts produced only 200. So the city manager, his name was Douglas Ayers. By the way, you can find this story in a book called Right Here in the City. You can find it. It's at Barnes & Noble. Doug wrote that about his experience here and on to Salem, Oregon, where he became city manager, and then on to where the forum is, forum in Los Angeles. It's a basketball stadium for the LA team played, and he built that, but then when he retired, he wrote a story about all of this, and he talked about his time here. Doug, our public works director, had come from Hollywood, California, Hollywood, Florida. So he knew a well driller in Hollywood, and they hired him to come up here and drill little wells from Sebastian Patrick Air Force Base and to drop Navy Marine yellow dye down into them. And after 4 or 5 months, the water started getting a yellow tinge. That's the way Milton got their water system.
That's the beauty of this kind of event, is you get these stories that you would never know. The written history is wonderful, but the spoken history is magical.
Read the book, because it's
Yeah, it was called Life Here in the City.
Life here in the city.
No, right here in the city.
right here.
Right
here in the city.
All right.
And what's his last name?
His name is Douglas Ayers, A-Y-R-E-S.
Fabulous. So as I've said, Frank?
Yes, I'd like to say one thing before you get away. This in '02, which is the 50th anniversary, I had a lot of these run off and copied. And this is the Indialantic, which you've been referring to. This is all Tradewinds. And this is quite interesting, and I think it's valuable. And I would have given it away, but the Indialantic committee said, we can sell this. And I should think that, and I've got a bunch of them.
Okay.
And you're welcome to, and you really ought to be something that you have.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just ask you a question, though? In that book, do you say that Ponce de Leon landed in Nova Beach?
Well, I didn't write this, but I said it in others, and I think that the fact that you stated Tradewinds should have been brought
Before we conclude with each member saying a little thing before we end, are any more questions out in the crowd? Yes.
You mentioned mentioning the website. If you want to get to the website, just do a Google search, go to Indialantic, and then Indialantic.com.
IndialanticHeritage.com.
IndialanticHeritage.com.
On the card. Do you have a question?
You said earlier that the Indians have some of the stuff that there's Indians.
Yes, ma'am?
We came here in '63 and worked for radiation. And at the time, radiation used to have a lot of their Christmas parties at the trade place, which later became Marisco.
I remember a place in Indialantic called, or just north, that's called, I think it was called Neptune Hall. Oh, yeah. Is that any relation to Tradewinds?
No.
Remember that? It was a restaurant. It was owned by a family from Indialantic, though, wasn't it?
Herring.
I remember.
The Herring family. Jim used to date the daughter of the Herring. Yeah. That's how we know. They used to have horses and stalls there, and they used to ride horses on the beach, right? Yeah. They had several daughters, and yeah. I'd like to conclude this afternoon with at least going past each member and either give us a story or something that makes you love Indialantic.
Oh.
We'll start with you, Marcia.
Oh, here. Well, I will always love Indialantic. I live in Vero Beach now, but as I always say, my heart is in Vero Beach, but my soul will always be here in Indialantic. And I think one of the things I love the most is that magnificent beach of ours and the ocean, and to be able to walk down there and see a sunrise, a sunrise and go see a sunset at the river means that you're right in the middle, which is the Indian River and the Atlantic Ocean. So Indialantic has a real place in my heart. And I think one of the things I remember about that beach that I probably didn't say was that during World War II, when we were talking about how some of the women would walk up and down the beach, well, in many cases, they would find sailors, the bodies of sailors that had washed ashore. And I think Bob could probably tell you a little bit more background on that too, Bob Marks, about the different freighters that were out there and the German submarines. But that was part of our world here. And just one last little thing, we talked about the Naval Air Station, Melbourne Naval Air Station, where Captain Andy Anderson and his two darling daughters lived right there on Fifth Avenue in Indialantic. So we had a lot of good individuals that came and loved Indialantic as much as we all did.
Deanne, you're going to get the last word
Well,
after your sister, so you're right there in a good position now.
What I love the best about Indialantic, and I was 3 months old when I came here. I came from another northern city,
Chattanooga.
but I loved the beach. We grew up, we walked to the beach by ourselves. We just lived in that little house there. We walked to the beach all the time by ourselves. We were allowed to go up there. We weren't allowed to swim. We blew up mattress pads. We had these big cloth mattress covers we put on our mattresses. We would blow them up and then run and ride them in. We didn't have any of the stuff that you bought. We used the mattress bags to catch the waves. But what I miss the most, and I'm sure you don't even know what I'm talking about, we caught coquinas in the ocean. We took our hands and went under the water like this, and they cleaned your fingernails, and you got these clam shells, and it took 5,000 of them, but you would bring them home. Do you remember, Dan? And you would cook them, you would put them in their shell and cover them with water and boil it till the little clams opened up, and then it was the most incredibly wonderful, with a lot of butter. Coquina broth. But I remember that. I remember the sand fleas that we caught and we fished with our own sand fleas, and I sold them to the men that were fishing for 25 cents for 100. I was 10. 25 cents was a lot of money in those days. But I remember this world, and I loved it the way it was. But I love the world the way it is now. I love it with all the people that it brings, all the interesting things I learned, all the marvelous, wonderful stuff you bring to us that we didn't have. And the hotels brought them. All of those things made our community a lovelier place to live. So you guys have a lot of kudos for being here.
Okay, Dan, your turn.
Well, I think one thing that Indialantic is a beautiful place. And we have this wonderful, we've been talking about the past and how this is wonderful. And it was socially and interpersonally, Indialantic was wonderful because first place everybody knew who you were and you were safe. But it wasn't as pretty as it is now. There was a lot of sand here.
Sand spurs.
You could not even think about going outside without getting covered with sand spurs. There were mosquitoes and there were sandflies if you lived near the river. So, I mean, everybody's, this is all this wonderfulness stuff. But there was a lot of sand here. It wasn't walking down these beautiful meadows to the beach and stuff like that. It was a chore. And we forget this. We forget this. And people have asked me over the years, Daddy, why don't you run for town council here? I said, that's a terrible idea. They said, well, you've got this long vision of the place. I said, that's a blade that cuts both ways. How can I possibly run on a platform and wanting to blow up the 192 bridge. They off when surfing's out, so.
That would definitely be an interesting agenda for sure. Okay.
One of my fondest memories is the Australian pines from Fifth Avenue down to Melbourne Beach, because it was like going through a tunnel.
Yeah, my husband described it.
And that was probably one of my favorite things. And back then, of course, you could ride your bicycle right down the middle of the road and very little traffic. I think that's probably one of the things I miss the most.
Was that on A1A?
And what happened? There was a couple of them too.
They froze, freeze, killed them.
Well, there's a huge cove of them on the corner of Indialantic, Camp, you know, your road. There, where the park is, where the children's park is, that was huge trees, and we pulled our, you remember this, we pulled our cars and they smooch at night before they went home.
They whistle, and it's really amazing. But I would like to thank you all for coming today, and I hope that you'll stay and talk to each other and talk to our panelists and enjoy some of our drinks. And I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer, our lady of...
I just want to ask one thing.
Sure.
How many people are here today that actually live on the Tradewinds property?
We asked that originally, and there's quite a few.
That's it.
Are you done? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming and adding to this video.